You're listening to Season 2 of the Grief Sense podcast. I'm your host, Mimi Gonzalez, aka the Zillennial Griever. I am a creative, entrepreneur, social impact strategist, and community organizer based in Hartford, Connecticut. But most importantly, I am a griever. Grief Sense is really a safe space for creatives who are grievers. And I really created this space because it's something I wish I had. And sometimes you have to create the things that you wish existed. I am a serial griever where I've experienced significant loss, losing about 20 people before I turned 25 years old. And it was really hard to find community, people who looked like me in the death positive movement space. On the show, you'll mainly hear from Gen Z and millennial minoritized grievers, but you'll also have some advocates on the show who share our experience, but also want to amplify our voices and our stories. So what is Grief Sense? What does that even mean, right? It's not just some fancy name of a brand of the podcast, okay? It's actually a term that I've coined to name my experience. Sometimes the words that exist in our vernacular aren't really representative of our lived experience. And so thus Grief Sense was born. So Grief Sense to me really is an inner sixth sense and intuition that's unlocked after experiencing physical loss, and it inspires purpose through creative expression, hence grievers who are creatives. So we do this in three ways. One, we embrace our mantra, which is we live life as a privilege. Two, we honor our ancestors and the legacies of our loved ones who have died. And three, we not only normalize talking about grief and death and everything in between, but we really talk about the importance of planning for our death and talking about this in community with our families. What are our death care wishes? And really normalizing that, because that is not something that we typically do in our very death phobic world. I hope that when you tuned into these episodes that you feel super comfortable. I want you to think that you are in a living room, or in Spanish we say the sala, but the grief sala. And I hope that you're able to have tea in your hand or a cafecito, so that way you're comfortable. I want you to feel like you're talking to your best friends or your primos or your cousins, people who really understand you and get it. And if you are not a griever, and if you are here to learn and listen to the stories that are shared on the show, thank you so much for being here. Your voice is important too, because guess what? If you're not a griever now, unfortunately, you will be one day. And I'm hoping that the insights that you hear on the show will help you navigate that experience. One thing I wanted to also share, y'all, Grief Sense is always going to be lowercase, because death, grief, all of that, it can be really scary. So these conversations is to really destigmatize death and grief, and really making sure it's like relatable, digestible, accessible. And yeah, it can be scary for sure, but let's do it together. Let's be in community together. So with that, welcome to the movement, welcome to La Familia, and welcome to Grief Sense. Let's dive in. Welcome back, Grief Sense Familia. We are here with another special episode, and today I have the utmost pleasure of having Anabel Vizcarra on with me today. I cannot wait for you all to listen to her story and all of the amazing insights she has to share with us and our community. So Anabel is an embodiment mentor and womb shaman, and I'm actually going to let her introduce herself to tell you about all of the amazing things that she does. But first, before she does that, Anabel, thank you so much for being here. I think our community is going to learn so much from you, and I can't wait. Like, I already know our conversation is about to be fuego, and I'm here for it.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mimi. And thank you so much for the invitation to be on here. Thank you to the listeners tuning in and making space to receive us, in this conversation. I'm Anabel Vizcarra, and I, like, as you said, I'm an embodiment mentor, womb shaman, curandera. And what that means is I work with a lot of the feminine energies so that we can embody that as women in leadership, women in our homes, and just women in the world, because as one of my core missions, visions, and beliefs is that when woman gets healthy, when woman gets whole, we're able to overflow nourishment, not only for ourselves, but for our families, which is where everything begins, our communities, and therefore our society. So for me, my mission is let's get as healthy as possible on all the levels, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and let's create. So that's a little short snippet. If you want to know more, you can always find out more online. So I'm excited to get into this conversation.
Oh my goodness. Wow. What an introduction. What a bio. I'm just so excited. And I love how you ended on this word create. And I feel like that can definitely set the tone for our conversation today. The word like just create and creativity has been so top of mind for me lately because I feel like to be able to create, you have to envision it in your mind first before it can physically manifest. And I've just been so, well, especially with your content. Oh my goodness. Like the way you have a way with words, my friend, like every single
Thank you.
post that you share, I'm like, wow, like it really just, it stops me in my tracks. It really calls for me to reflect even deeper and deeper and reach layers I never thought I could. And I feel like a lot of, definitely the Grief Sense community listening to you today, but all of your followers and people who you inspire. I mean, I just feel like we all are so blessed to cross paths with you. Just the way you speak, to people's souls, it's different and it's special. Yeah. And just the word create, I don't know, the fact that I don't know, called into existence this life affirming project, Grief Sense. This is literally one of my life's legacies. And to have that, risk, to take this risk to make this a reality and to create this, I would have never crossed paths with you. So it just means so much to me that you're here. And also a reminder to those listening to don't be afraid to take that risk and to create, to really, make those dreams and those ideas a reality because you never know who you'll meet. So
Amen to that. I feel like thank you so much for your words and the feedback and the reflections. And I find that as you're saying, like that word creation, right? Like create. It's for me, these words sometimes are like portals into a deeper way of knowing myself. And this is why I am intentional with words, because I feel like this is how we create not only our external realities, but our internal dialogues, right? About what we cannot do, where we come from, where we're going, all these different things. And I love that you took the risk, and we'll come back to that word risk, because that's been very at the forefront of my contemplations, my personal contemplations. But when, you took the risk to create this community, I feel like, as I said before we jumped on the call, grief for me is such a sacred body of work, a sacred transmission and frequency. And knowing what I know now and through my journey, we cannot create unless we learn how to grieve. We can create, but it's not sustainable. And I feel like what grief does is that it makes our creations sustainable. It allows them to grow and to kind of get out into the world. But it does come from that ability to be able to learn how to grieve, to remember, because we already know how, we just don't, we don't remember how. And so I love that you've taken the risk. Congratulations, to really put these conversations out there and inspire others, and also to normalize words that people are not comfortable with, because again, there's this sort of like this allergy to speaking of grief, of death, of letting go. And yet what we see in the world and in our own lives is that we're too full of the wrong things, too full of things that, need to be laid down to rest. And that until we are able to really create the space to do that, we just kind of keep chugging along, carrying along all these old heavy things that don't allow new things, new fresh ideas to come in, or even the energy for the action that's needed to create, right? So thank you.
Powerful. Very powerful. And I love what you said about grief really fueling this sustainability, because Really, that is exactly what grief sense means. I mean, there's so many different terms out there that have, I guess, are synonyms to the word that am claiming as grief sense. I definitely feel you have grief sense. All of the guests that I have on the show have grief sense and don't even know it. And essentially, what I feel is that grievers or people who have experienced various types of loss, traumatic loss, whatever it is, loss when it comes to losing someone. So there's obviously relationship loss and job loss. There's many different types of grief. But grief sense, in the lens that I refer to it, is from the physical loss of losing somebody. And that experience fuels purpose and creating these beautiful creations and projects and legacies. And I truly feel like I just feel that I'm on a I don't know. I'm researching and investigating and finding people like you and I who share this grief sense, who share this purpose, and how they are nourishing their communities and how they are healing themselves and thus healing their lineages and their families. And so all of that, definitely calling that into our space today. So
Yes, calling that in, that inspiration that comes from that deep heart loss. Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
absolutely. So, well, with that, with every Grief Sense episode, we would not be here if it weren't for our grief. And so, with that, would you be able to share with us, who would you like to honor today?
Yes, so today I am bringing forth my father, because he was that origin point of grief, right? That reference, and so I would like to bring him in, Jose Manuel Vizcarra, calling him
Wow.
forth so that we can have a beautiful, honoring conversation around the gifts that I've been granted through his passing.
Mm, wow. Even the way you put that, and I realize now too that you and I share this deep connection. Same thing, point of origin for me was the loss of my biological father, and it definitely shaped my worldview on many
Mm.
things. Would you be able to share as much as you are comfortable with sharing your grief story?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you. Thank you. I don't think I've ever shared it just on that. So thank you for this
Beautiful.
invitation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Buckle up, everyone, and buckle
Yeah,
up.
buckle up. Let's get some tea and get warm. So I grew up in Mexico, and at 9 years old, came here to the States on vacation with my family. And my father was murdered, and
Wow.
I was there, and I was able to see him right before he went into a coma, and obviously he didn't wake up from. And at 9 years old, having that experience, I am the oldest of four.
Mm,
So it was almost like losing God for me at that point.
mm,
And so he was everything to me. It was, we had such a beautiful, loving relationship, and I'm really grateful for all those memories. And when we were in Mexico, it was almost like living in this world of wonder. And we
mm,
lived in a really small town, so there was the rivers and the mountains, and the, like, you'd leave the house and not come back until it was getting dark, and all you're doing is just getting into trouble and doing mischievous things. And so coming here to what at that time, like for me, felt like a concrete jungle, like a jail
mm,
almost, because everything was so different. And then when that happened, my mother decided to stay here, and she decided that it was going to be the best for the four of us to be educated here, and give us an opportunity at that. And so she stayed here, no English, didn't know how to
mm,
drive, so that was really brave of her to just, go for it. And
wow.
and so growing up with that, that obviously had a completely different world that I had to face. And at 9 years old, it was almost like I went into this state of numbness, because for me, it kind of felt like it wasn't really real. It took years for me to realize that this was a reality. And so I, went on to school, did all the things. As the oldest, when I was 16 years old, my mom sat me down, and I remember speaking to her about going to college, and, I wanted to pursue being a journalist and like all these things. And she looked at me and she said, no, you got to forget about that, because you have to get to work. I cannot continue to do this by myself, and you're the oldest, so it's your job to, step in. And so it was, I didn't realize how heartbreaking that was until later. And so I, kind of took on this leader role inside of my family. And of course it had its blessings. I went on to real estate and had my own company and had my family working there, and just kind of envisioned the American dream for myself, right? Of like that home ownership, money in the bank, the car, taking care of my family. And that was beautiful because it drove me. It gave me the energy to keep going and to make something happen. And then, I kind of went on. However, what I didn't realize then was how unhealthy I was. I was a workaholic. I was eating my feelings away. So all the stress that I had with work, it was just eating. And then it wasn't until I actually, I got married and I had my son, that when I was giving birth to my son, my body, when I was in labor and he was coming into this world, my body had this experience of almost like, what you would say, like a awakening, or what people call kundalini awakening, or this, it was almost like I was in another world, which of course, giving birth, that's where we go, right? It's such a miraculous space. But what happened was I had a rush of all these memories, and it was the memory of seeing my father as he was, bleeding and passing away, and his eyes, how they locked with my eyes. It was the memory of the last words that he said to me. It was the memory, like all these, yes, all these things that were so repressed that I had not thought of. I had not remembered. There was a part of me that was protecting me from these memories. But when my son, my body opened in this way, it's almost like it released all this stuff that was stuck there, that was like just, in my tissue, literally. And so, yeah, it was very powerful. And I didn't know what that was, at that time. So after he was born, it was sort of like, wow, that was freaking weird. Like, what was that? Because it felt almost like a dream. When you're having a dream and it's so vivid, but then later on, you're like, oh yeah, that was an interesting dream. And so I repressed it back down because I had to get to work, and 2 weeks later I was at work again, and, kind of back into the hamster wheel and prison I had created for myself. And so luckily, I feel like that one of the beautiful things that life offers us is that it never forgets who we are at our core essence, and it's always inviting us deeper into that. And a lot of times when we don't listen, and this is what I know now, I'm about to be 44 years old, and realizing now that life, if we don't listen to the little signs, if we don't listen to the symptoms, if we don't listen to these things, what life will do is it will create a crisis, so that we can have that opportunity to choose differently. And so when, at that time, when I had my son, I was 25. So about 26, this opportunity was created for me, which was the collapse of the economy. Around 2008, what happened in real estate. And because I was so unavailable, I was kind of in this like very like controlled focus driver space, very masculine kind of energy. I wasn't able to really see like all the signs that life was giving me, that the direction needed a shift, that there was adjustments needed to be made. And so I just kind of kept going in the same way that I had built this business of like, just make it work, get up, show up, do it, don't think about it. And so of course, I spent all my savings, all my things. And because so much of my world at that time was created around money, when that collapsed, my entire world collapsed. My marriage ended. The respect, quote unquote, that I had from my family also dissolved because now I couldn't pay them, so, and that's what that respect was based on. And so there was all these things that kind of took away everything that had given me meaning except my son. And I remember, being so depressed and so like, what the hell am I doing? What's going to happen now? And everything that I believed was gone. And so I would still wake up every morning and see that little face of my son looking at me and like giggling. He was such a happy baby, and just like all and me crying, like, what was happening? And actually it was I remember this one morning, I had something, happen with him where I couldn't buy something that we had always gone to enjoy. It was a piece of pie that, we would always go and sit down and enjoy together. And there was this day where I couldn't pay for it. And it was like $8, something like that. And that was like a breaking point for me where I realized like what I was in, that this was, I needed to change something deeply. And so that's where my direction really shifted. And I asked myself, if that definition of living, that definition of success or of happiness was not real, what is real? And what am I going to teach this little boy? What am I going to teach him is true success or fulfillment in the world, because obviously I was not on the right track. And so I started my journey with going back to the beginning of studying around herbs, because in Mexico, I just had this like knack for like people, would be like, Anabel, what do you think I should take for this? Or, what's good to take for a tummy ache or for cramps or for, there was always this aspect of that came naturally for me. And so I decided to start with what was it that I loved and came natural to me at a younger age that I had discarded. And so I went into Ayurveda school and got my practitioner's practice there. And because I did my main paper, I did it on women's reproductive system. That's what introduced me into a lot of the work that I do today, which is like feminine wisdom, womb wisdom. When I got on my journey, there was so many things to heal, right? Like, once we start there, there's so many threads that are going to come up. But I will tell you, Mimi, that I was maybe about 2 years into my healing journey, and I touched a grief that was so deep, that was so big, that it felt like it was going to destroy me. And it was really, really scary to go there. And that's where my apprenticeship to grief came. And I still say I'm still in this apprenticeship because it's a lifetime apprenticeship for me. But it was through that work, and no one was talking about this then. This was many, many years ago. You're so young, and there was no one really speaking into what I was experiencing. And so I had to be in a deep grief process for about 3 years, where I was literally 2-3 years, literally crying every day, allowing myself to feel this, because even though I didn't know what I was feeling, there was a part of me that knew that I was right where I needed to be. And my family was worried. My family kept telling me, like, you have problems, like you need to go see a psychiatrist, you need to go see, go seek help. And of course it makes sense, because I went from being this in control, successful figure it out, take care of everything, to now like the other end of that spectrum, which was completely dissolved into nothingness and lost and didn't know what was happening. And luckily I did have, and I don't think it's luck. I think it's all by design, really. But I came across my teachers that I went deeper into the womb shamanism with. And the way I came across them was through my dreams. Believe it or not, I had this dream. I woke up, I Googled it, and this is how I came across them. And that's where I at least had a lifeline to be able to go deeper. And I say this now often, and I don't know if you know this, but like for my community, I host grief workshops because I feel that sometimes the reason we don't approach that grief is because it is so overwhelming. And it is important to seek the support that can hold that lifeline for you as you go deeper into it. Because I know for myself that was what really allowed me to open and receive the wisdom that was there, and to touch in that this lack of grieving, this inability to have grieved my father's loss, led me to so many losses. It led me to not being able to be open to love. It created control mechanisms to defend my heart. And it led to my divorce. It led to, losing other relationships, because I didn't know that deep down there was this hurt and this tenderness and this preciousness that had been covered up by all this numbing and all these ways of like how I'm going to keep people out, because if I'm too open, too vulnerable, and I lose them, the same thing's going to happen again. And so I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation around grief, because I do believe that grief work is what really tunes us into our soul's calling and our soul's purpose. And obviously not everybody has to take the journey the same way or wait. And this is why I speak about this, is because we don't have to wait for the crisis. We don't have to wait for like what happened to me, to listen. And we can approach grief in a way where we court it. We don't, we can begin to learn from it and to open to it and invite it in, because there used to be at one point, there was the grief mysteries that were part of the feminine wisdom temples, where they learn how to grieve, how to lament, how to weep, and how healing that was for our feminine body. And when I say feminine body, I'm not only speaking of women, I'm speaking of feminine being a dimension of where creativity exists, right? Of where that web of life and that pulse of life originates from. And so, and by the way, stop me at any point, because I can just go on and on and on.
This is great. Keep going. I mean, I have a few like questions that have popped into my mind with things that you've shared, but if you want to finish your thought, we can. I'll
and I'll wrap this up with this, that what I have found as well is that our ability to grieve is also our ability to experience wealth. And wealth externally, yes, but most importantly, wealth internally. And I don't feel that we really value that as a society, as a collective, as humans, that inner wealth that is naturally there, and that can be married to an external wealth to experience true fulfillment on this plane. And in this moment, I'm also thinking of what I was saying about not waiting for a crisis, but sometimes that's what's necessary. But how many people, I want to honor them and all of that work, have created beautiful body of works through the loss that they've experienced, whether it's been a mother creating a program because of the way that she lost her child or spouse, or like all these different things that allow us to pour that loss and that pain of not having our loved ones, and harness that energy and pour that as a labor of love into something that honors their life, that honors their memory. And so, and again, I feel so grateful because I feel like my father and the loss of his life actually infused my life with this greater longing to carry out something that was soul led, heart led, not just materially led.
Wow. I'm going to take a deep breath and also welcome you and our listeners to do that, just to hold space for everything that you shared. So if you'd like to join me, we'll breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, and exhale for 4. So inhale, hold, exhale. Really just wanted to hold space for that because, again, you're just a natural storyteller, and you've been through so much pain and trauma, and you've really taken life by the reins, both in the masculine energy and feminine energy. And I feel that you are naturally harmonizing these dimensions and lenses of which on how to create and how to inspire the world, and those listening to really learn how to harmonize the different energies that we have and to really focus on the feminine. And I love what you said about this is a space for creativity, and that's the lens in which you approach, right? Because it doesn't matter if someone has a womb or not, right? It's an inclusive space that everyone has a role in. So I really want to acknowledge that and thank you for sharing that and educating us on that. And then for us to kind of rewind a little bit on when you were talking about the delivery process of your son, you talked about how you had this, rush of memories kind of come into your mind as you're going through this life altering experience. And I could only, think about, so I'm very interested in the metaphysical world and people who have had experiences in the metaphysical space. But the two things that came into my mind were folks that experience like near death experiences, and as well when someone's in hospice, when they experience that life review where they have like this reel of all of the important memories in their life. And I've never heard anyone recount that in a way during their delivery process of giving birth to life. And so have you heard of other women or other people experiencing that same experience? I don't know. That's just really fascinating to me. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that if you're open.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like it is the same how you said the near death experiences, and I do serve in instances as a death doula, right? Which means that moment, kind of finalizing or a time here and then crossing over. And I feel that it is that same aspect of it. It's almost like there's so many sages and in sacred texts that speak of this rebirth, this aspect of dying while you're alive, right? Like how many deaths we will have in our lives before the final death, right? And I feel that that's what so much of the times now are awakening in us, is like this ability to die before we die, into a new, deeper aspect of ourselves. And I have not heard many stories around, birthing and having this experience. And also, I know that they're out there, because I experienced it, and I've spoken to some women who have a recollection. But I also feel that sometimes we experience it and then it goes underground again if it's not something that's coaxed out or that's worked with. Because when we, as women, when we give birth, that is kind of, it's a very shamanic space. So it's almost like taking this journey of plant medicine without the plant medicine, or this very shamanic state that is natural for women in a lot of ways. However, I would say that now, having experienced that, and when I work with women, so many of our memories are in our bodies, and there's so many experts on trauma that now embrace this and speak about it, right? Of, kind of like the body keeps score. That's a great book on that. But how our very tissue is holding these memories. And when we begin to work with the body, this happens. Now we can work with the body in a way that's not necessarily birth, or almost dying or crossing over. I feel like now we can consciously begin, and this is the a lot of the work that I do, is bringing this awareness, coaxing these memories from the body itself. And as women, as womb holders, and not necessarily, you don't have to have a physical womb. We all have access to this. We hold so many memories in our pelvic chalice. This is our ancestral cauldron, in a way, our lineage cauldron. And so when we begin to work with this space, with our bellies, there's so much wisdom there, and so many memories to dissolve, and or narratives to bring forth as fresh, as new, as life-giving, because many of us do carry a lot of these death stories that are not life-giving, but that are killing us slowly in our lives, that are poisoning us slowly. And so it's learning how to create that, right? Like, how do I take this story that is like sucking my life away, and instead shift it into the narrative that is life-giving and that allows me to create, which is our innate blueprint, our innate birthright, is to create. And I do feel, there's so many ways to begin to work with this, and not have to wait until we give birth to have these stories. But we don't know until we know. And for me, that's why it's so important, like the work that you do, Mimi, this invitation to be with our grief, to court our grief, and to pay attention to the stories of loss that actually are here to activate us in such greater, more expansive ways than just to make us miserable. But if we don't know that, then we kind of go on with doing the best that we can. And so that's why platforms like this are so important. Conversations like this are so important. So thank you
Thank
for that.
you. Thank you. And I think a recurring pattern too that I am drawing from what you're saying is this sense of being proactive and proactivity, like not waiting until we're in crisis to honor or acknowledge grief. Because guess what? Even if we haven't experienced loss in the physical sense, we still experience grief in a myriad of ways. But it's like we all are going to experience physical grief. And so why wait till we get to that point to start living your life purposefully, intentionally, with meaning, to even co-create and co-build with our family members and the people that we love, our chosen families, our friends, before they die, before we die. It's really that proactive sense. And I heard that also when you were talking about before, seeking parenthood, like being proactive before reaching parenthood, if that is something that you do choose to do and to explore, like what are some of these lessons and takeaways that we can experience prior to doing that, right? And
Mhm.
I can only naturally, and I've never shared this like publicly on this in this sense, but I feel that you really intentionally create a really safe space and invitation to talk about what I'm about to share. So thank you for this. But when it comes to womb healing, and when it comes to even grief being a point of origin, that's definitely resonates well with my story. And so I do remember, ever since I was a teenager, I just remember I'm like, I don't want children. Like, it is not my preference to become a mom. It was never something that was appealing to me, because it naturally felt that I was already a mom without having to have given physical birth to my siblings. But I felt that I heard it and I felt it so deeply. And I think that's what made me so emotional when you were recounting the story of your father, because, and I do want to acknowledge, I do have a father that raised me, right, who kind of stepped in as my dad and my protector. And I'm so grateful to have that blessing and experience with a stepfather, because I know a lot of other people don't have that special bond and that experience. But as we know, right, in this space, two or multiple truths can coexist at once.
Absolutely.
Um, but losing my biological father and having that be my point of origin to grief, it really affected so many different aspects of my identity, where it felt like my childhood was taken away from me. And it felt that what was innocence? I don't know. I didn't have it. I never experienced that, because it felt like I was, essentially forced to grow up at a young age, like many of us are when we experience parental loss or any other tragedies at such a young age. And then so we're kind of having to navigate life without having like a core pillar in our lives who are supposed to, steer us in a direction and help us and guide us. And I had to essentially become my own protector. Even though I had my mom, who's definitely a primary, caregiver and protector of mine, but my mother lost her love, her deep bond with her partner. And I think the primary reason why I have chosen for so long to opt out of motherhood or becoming a parent is because one of my deepest fears and traumas, and I acknowledge this, I went to therapy for several years for this, was because I fear losing my partner and then my child having to grow up without their biological father, like how that happened with my mom. And my mom had me, so she was 16 turning 17. I was 8 months old, and my dad died 8 months after I was born, and he was only 21. And and he I feel that it was like a half murder, half, I don't know. Essentially, he died in a motorcycle accident, but he had a friend give him a motorcycle without brakes. And he was really big into the motorcycle culture, and Hartford. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut, by the way, and around that time in the 90s was definitely infested with gangs, and he was in the street life and everything like that. A car ended up crashing into him, and the motorcycle didn't have brakes, and the rest of the story I'm sure you can put two and two together. He didn't make it. And so I think that experience is just so traumatic, but it is like the origin to my pain and to my healing. And so I feel like, and I just turned 28, and I do feel so much pressure these days to become a mom. Like, when are you going to have kids? Your partner wants kids. Why don't you? Like, so much pressure from everywhere. And I'm sure, being Latina and having Latina family, every time I see my grandfather or my uncle, when are you going to have kids? Y mis nietos, or when are you going to get married? And I'm just like, can I live my life? Can I heal? Can I travel the world? Can I do the things that none of you decided to do? Like, because I'm trying to heal us and like just do the things and break all the curses and all of the healing stuff. But it's like, I recognize that even if I do decide to make that decision one day, right now I'm still not there, and it's okay. And if I decide to never, that's also okay. And I always want to encourage folks that, like, don't let folks kind of force you into something. If it doesn't make sense for you, don't. But something that has come into my mind now, being in this space with you that never has before, is do the womb healing, even if you still decide not to become a parent. And I think that to me is like a really important lesson that I've never experienced before. So I want to thank you for that. And because I do have that, as many women share, right, sexual trauma that I've experienced myself in my younger years, and with losing, such a key protector so early on in my life. And I've lost over 20 people before I turned 25 years old. It's just serial loss on top of loss on top of loss. And it's like all of these losses I've experienced, and to your point earlier about just like experiencing many deaths in life and rebirths, I feel like I've reinvented myself so many times that I've been able to kind of fine tune who I want to be and my dreams and my goals, because I've experienced so many of those experiences at such an early age. And so by the time I'm, 30, 40, 50, I'm just excited for what I'm going to create. And I do know that there's plenty grief as well to be experienced in the coming years and months and moments, but I welcome it with all arms, as well as how I welcome the positive experiences too, because I feel like to be alive is to grieve, is to feel, is to heal, is to experience everything in our human experience while we have it before we transition, right? And so, yeah. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share. So thank you for listening.
Ooh, now we need a
Yeah,
deep
it's a
breath.
lot. It's a lot.
That's so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing that. That's so courageous for you to share that, in this space, because I think also as women, this is a conversation that, there's not a lot of room for, right? Like to really express those deepest fears and things around motherhood, around, all these things that society has assigned to what woman's role is. And when we step back and say, hey, wait a minute, I want to re-examine this. I want to know, is this actually a choice that I am making, or is this society making the choice for me? And that's really, really powerful. So thank you for sharing that, and sending that ripple of courage out into the community of listeners, because it is so important. And I love that you also said that awareness that you have around doing that womb healing, even if motherhood is not for you, because I think that that's so important. Sometimes when I share about like the womb healing or the womb work, so many people think so it's because I don't have any fertility things, or yeah, I don't want to have children, or I already had all the children I want. And it's so not about that. It's deeper. Like, yes, it includes that, but it also it's so much deeper in the sense of, what are you here to birth? If it's not children, it's projects, it's books, it's businesses. What are you here to birth? And getting really, clear on that, because sometimes, we go from one end to the other, right? Like it's a overcorrection. Yeah. And it's like an overcorrection of what our how we interpreted our hurt, and I share with you in that deep fear of being born from the loss of my father, like you. One of my greatest fears still today is that I will lose my partner, like my life partner, that I finally we come together and then it's taken away, and I live with that every day. And I have learned also how to live with that, not as a way that it limits me or keeps me away or keeps love out, but as a way that makes me very present, that makes me grateful for what I am in today. Right. And I think that for, your journey, the way that and I love how similar our journees are in
it's
many
wild.
threads. This is why we're in the grief world. Yeah. But, even as you share like these losses that you have had over your young life, because you're 28, and how this has shaped the grooves that have led you to be where you are today, speaking on these conversations at such a young age, bringing these awarenesses to the community, that tunes in, and how you're already conceiving so much, you're without, it having to be a child. And I'll tell you that, my sister, she kind of took that on. She said, I'm not going to have children. I don't want any children. Where I was on the other end of it, I was like, I was born to give birth to babies, and again, look how life is so interesting. I only had one, and I'm 44, and I only have one son. And she at 38 got pregnant, and had her baby girl. And the amazing thing about that is that seeing her become a mother at a later stage through the awarenesses that she's in now is so different than when I was pregnant at 25 and just mindless, and so I do find that there is beauty in giving yourself the time to really come into these life-changing experiences in a conscious way, not like we would before, where it was just like, oh, well, you have a baby at 18, at 21, and if you don't have any, then what are you even doing with your life? Those are not the narratives that our generation, your generation especially, is needing to carry out senselessly, and that womb healing that comes from all the, we hold so many violations in our bodies, and not just ours. Once we begin to unravel these things, we realize that sometimes these are generational threads that we are becoming aware of, and that it is our time, like you said, to interrupt those unhealthy patterns, those curses that, can be called curses because they limit our lives, and that you get to now translate into something that gives life, into something that gives true resilience. Because I think that that's the other part of it, that it's so many of us, and I know this was me, pride ourselves in that resilience, that I could get through anything, I could get through life, like, I'm not going to be a victim. And in that, there's a false sense of strength that is also poisonous to the system, to our adrenals. So it's so important, that we pay attention to what we have been challenged with, or like patterns that move through the family as well. Because again, our bodies, our womb space, that pelvic chalice carries so much memory around unresolved things. And for some, it shows up as that, like, not, I don't want to have children, or some, it's like, what's my purpose here? What am I even doing with my life? Like all these different things. Or also that part of just mindlessly being in a life that you think you have no choice, staying in toxic relationships because that's the way it's always been, and carrying out our mother's woundings, our grandmother's woundings. So much moves through our mother line as well. And just to elaborate a little bit on that, I'll say you saw your mom, how it affected her, how it influenced her, right? Like the loss. And I saw my mom and how it influenced her. And within that, I also judged, and I also, kind of made these ideas of how my mom was and how I'll never be like that. And that will never happen to me. And for me, my mom really embodied like the martyr, the victim, all that. And I went on the other end, like, oh, that will never be me. I am going to be in control. I am going to make things happen and be independent and all these things. But again, neither end is healthy, but it's an overcorrection of what we think we need and how we interpret the stories that move through our life, our lineages, our parents. And so, yeah, even starting there's so much grief around that, right? Like that aspect of there's so many threads that die with us stepping into our power. So many that need to be laid down to rest.
That's the whole word. That's the whole word. I just have to snap to that. Wow. And just this narrative of, I keep hearing in my brain, what's coming into me in this moment is like this duality of like death and life, and like how death and grief affects the living. And to your point earlier about, there's kind of this duality or multiple truths around what parenthood can look like, on what feminine can look like, and what creativity and birthing projects, whatever birth means to you, and what that looks like, and what grief And when I think about grief, it's like, yes, we're talking about grief and death and dying and everything that comes within the death positive movement, which is essentially a role that you and I both actively play in, and creators in this space. But it's also about living, right? Grief is as much as it is about death as it is about living and confronting our mortality in a way that, how are we going to maximize our time here, right? What does that look like for us while we are here? And to your point about, I think you were mentioning about like your father's death and things that you were experiencing, it's like a call to action to be present in life. And that's exactly what I drew from my experience as well, and what I encourage others. Like, what does being present look like for you? It's going to look different, right? We grow differently. The way we heal is going to look different for all of us. The way we create, the things we create are going to look differently for all of us. But I think that acknowledging that we all have a role to play in living a meaningful, beautiful, peaceful, present life, like, what does that look like for you? And how can the things that we're talking about today help you achieve that, or help you kind of draw internally, whether that's in through your, your pelvic area and your region and healing your womb, and all the other areas and chakras in your life too. Like, where is the pain, and how can we find healing through creation, through community, and through being present in life, and in whatever way that makes sense for you. So I don't know, with what I just said, what kind of comes into your mind with that, and how would you recommend folks to start this healing journey? And if, especially if you want to speak to the work that you do around, being a womb shaman, like, where do people even start with that? And maybe how can they even get in touch with you and the work that they do, so that they can work directly with you? But yeah, all the things.
All the things. I when I'm listening to you, the first thing that like is really at the forefront is the relationship between life and death, right? And that how, for me, how it feels now, it's like that eternal entanglement between love and grief, that the more that we're able to grieve, the more that we're able to open to love,
Mm,
and therefore the more that we're open to life.
mm,
And I feel that we're so afraid in so many ways of death and of loss, but only because we don't know how to approach it, how to work with it, how to be with it. And we are, in a way atrophied of this. And pre this society, in where it's all about rising and growing and external and shining, right? That we have forgotten how to be with the roots, how to tend to the darkness, how to tend to the soil for the healthy fruit. So in a way, we're kind of living out of this false sense of everything's always growing and shining and doing better. And somehow,
mm,
if you're not, there's something wrong with you.
mm.
And there isn't.
Powerful, very powerful.
And I feel like that's to truly become alive, is to realize that we're seasonal beings. We
Mm,
live in rhythms that require the winter of of our inner reflection, and the summer of our radiance, of our putting our things out there, right? And when we're disconnected from the seasonal aspect of life, which also means letting go, creating space. Can you imagine a tree that try to hang on to its dead leaves because it thinks they're not gonna come back again? That doesn't happen.
yeah.
And we are
That's a
also
good point.
seasonal, but we don't realize that is a part that we are atrophied from, that we have forgotten, and that our grandmothers, our lineages knew this, especially indigenous lineages, where there was rituals that demarcated times, that this is why we have the equinox, because there was actual rituals around change.
Mm,
Quinceañeras, where did they come from? They came from originally a girl that menstruated and was celebrated stepping into now her womanhood. And so there was this whole ritual and ceremony around now bringing that forward. But we've been disconnected from this. And so now we think that there's always just this growth and amazingness, and that's all there is. And
Right.
and again, when we're touched by those deeper ways that call us inward, we think there something has gone wrong. And actually, this is where everything is born from. Though that shine, that fruit, that, external, if it's not sourced from that internal peace and internal knowing, it's not going to satisfy that deeper hunger of the soul, which is to express itself and to receive fulfillment, right? So I feel, bringing in this, like, living is learning how to hold the tension of the opposites, which are death and life, how to not run away from either, because they both have their time and their space and cycles is such an important thing. It's like, now, as I'm in, like I mentioned, I'm 44, I'm stepping into this perimenopausal time in my life, and what if I'm trying to hang on to being 28 years old, and feeling like I was when I was 28, in my body and all these things? That creates so much suffering, so much division inside of me, where my work now is grieving those aspects of me that are now, kind of being dissolved in order to make space for what is now. Now I'm in a time of this, embodying that greater wise woman in me, and I am so grateful to be able to have that awareness, because now embracing that aspect can lead me into a mature elderhood, which is so needed in our world. And I see elders, and I'll tell you something, I love learning from elders, but one thing that one of them said to me was, we have a gap of 2 generations where we have no elders, because those elders that are just old, because you grow old or you grow elder, right? But those older people are still trying to hang on to being in their youth, and because they were never they didn't allow themselves to become seasonal, become part of the season. It doesn't mean you let yourself go, or anything like that by any means, but the vitality is, it's different. It changes because it serves a different purpose, not because it's less or more than, but because now you are standing in the place where you belong and where your highest service is. And so much of our suffering comes from feeling like we don't belong, from feeling separate, and divided. And so much of it is our forgetting, because when we remember that we are cyclical beings as well, and our bodies show us that, right? As a woman, we have our monthly cycle. It's consistently shown to us, whether it's through nature, through our own bodies, through our own life cycles. You're 28, you're in a time where, it's almost like, oh, now you're being initiated into a more maturing version of you, right? So it's like a review time. And this is why we experience this midlife crisis that is so crazy, right? Because those years are meant to help us sit down and reassess where we are. Are we engaging what is real, fulfilling truth for us? Or is it time to make space and make changes? Being with grief, we're closely always walking with change, but we're engaging it in a conscious way where we can extract the wisdom from it and then pass that on to the next generation. So grief is just, for me, is an incredible web of life.
And
to
again,
grieve is to live.
To grieve is to live, to grieve is to love, to grieve is to create, right? It's like this constant duality. I don't really view life or death as binaries. I view them as a spectrum, right? There's so many deaths and rebirths that we're going to experience on this spectrum of life. And it's all like, until we get to that final, stage of life where we are transitioning from our physical bodies into whatever the next phase is, if you believe in
Yes.
that. And something I really want to acknowledge that you said, and it's been a constant reminder for me, because I did the corporate life. I also kind of walking into that really masculine driven energy of like, gotta go, 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 gotta do this, gotta do that. And it's interesting, a lot of the I think, even though grief is definitely beautiful and powerful, it's very painful and traumatic, and like, and I really want the listeners out there to hold space for this. Like, as much as I say that grief is love and beautiful things can come out of grief, I'm in no way dismissing or discounting
Yes.
the awful, tumultuous pain that comes with this. And no matter how much healing you do, it's still going to be there. It's like we have to learn how to coexist with our grief, not suppress it, not ignore it, integrate, right? Integrate our
Mm-hmm.
lives with our grief in a way that it's not governing every single thing that we do, but it's a part of us, and kind of really acknowledging that. So I really wanted to say that before I say what I'm about to say. But it's also this way of really acknowledging that, for me, I think with all of the loss that I experienced in a short amount of time and together, I called it the grief clusterfuck, because it's like a ball of yarn that's super tangled, and so much loss in such a short time frame. But that, to me, I guess the trauma that came from that, my trauma response to that was, oh my goodness, I have to do all of these things before I die. I have to create my podcast. I have to go to corporate America. I need to go to college. I gotta, inspire my younger siblings so that, all of these things are in my head. And it was a constant race against the clock. And I won't lie, I still feel that pressure. I definitely still have that pressure on me of like, I don't fear death itself at all, actually. But what I do fear is not being able to do the things that I want to do before I die, because of the impact that I want to pay forward with my community and with my family, and the legacies that I want to leave behind. So I do have that, but that was a main driving force for me. The majority of my 20s was, got to do
Mm-hmm.
this because I don't know when I'm going to die. Like, I literally, because my father died at 21 years old, it was a thing. Me and my mom always would tell me every single birthday, Mija, like on my 21st birthday, she was like, don't go out. Like, we just had to make it to 21. And that was such a big deal. And so when I finally reached the age of 21, I'm like, well, shit, what do I do now? Because
Wow.
it was beat in my head, we have to make it to 21. And now at 28, like, for me, that's like one of the biggest accomplishments ever, is living, being alive with all
Mm.
of the trauma and things that I've experienced, that my family's experienced. Like, I'm still here. Like, that's a huge accomplishment. To be here, to live, to feel, to be in community, to meet people like you, to do what I love, podcasting and communicating with people and creating, like, that is such a gift. And so I'm kind of transitioning from that race against the clock, masculine driven force, to now embracing everything that comes to me. And if death is on the cards for me sooner than later, or sooner than I expect, so be it. But I know that I'm living intentionally, and that's all I can ask of myself, is to live with intention and to live with purpose, to live with love and community and healing. Like, I want everyone, when they interact with me, to feel like we just had a healing conversation, because they felt heard and supported and included. And like, that's all I want. That's literally all I want out of life. There's nothing more that I can ask for. And like, and to laugh. Belly laughing is like,
Yes.
if I had a requirement out of life, that's all I need. I need to belly laugh. And like, it's just
Yeah.
great. I laugh every single day, and humor is such a big part of my life. And, I love comedy. I mean, I don't like the problematic comedians, but I really do love comedy. I feel like it's a true art form. But anyway, I
Mm-hmm.
digress. But essentially, really, as we talk about this duality of life and death, and just everything that comes with that, that's the lens that I'm kind of operating from. As you mentioned, getting into this like more mature stage of my life, I really don't want to resist anything. I want to welcome everything with open arms and love. And that's all I got. That's all I got at this moment. And like,
That's beautiful, beautiful.
and also to your point about living seasonally. So I graduated from this women entrepreneurship program last year, led by the amazing, you should definitely look her up, she's amazing, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver. So shout out to Dr. Avis, my business coach. And she led this amazing business strategy session, kind of like a reimagined vision board session, but with goals and accountability, and like putting dates and actions to the priorities that you want to set the tone for the year. And so I led a similar session with some of my entrepreneur friends because I feel like I have all of this knowledge. So I really wanted to pour into my friends. And so we led a nice session together. We talked about our goals, our visions for the year, and we put dates on the calendar for things that we want to do. And my friend Teresa, I would love to connect you both. She is a Reiki coach. She's also, I think, 43 or 44 as well. And she lost both of her parents. And so she kind of talks about that experience and how that's kind of guided her life. But she brought up this point about living seasonally. And I feel like I've been getting so many different signs from the universe and from so many people. And here's another one right in my face. It's like, Mija, like, what do you need to do to, yes, uphold your vision of like being an entrepreneur and everything that comes with that? Because I think no matter what we do or say, we still live in a very capitalist, masculine driven society. And so it's like, how do we harmonize? And I'd love your insight on this. How do we harmonize between leaving our corporate jobs or the life, or so actually, let me bring this up. I had a previous guest named Antonio Morales, and his whole life work is around liberation frameworks and living in our oppressed self or living in our liberated self. And so as we're leaving or transitioning from the lives of living in our oppressed selves, of working in conditions where we're, forced to work into these spaces and places, right? The American dream, or like the American nightmare. But anyway, how do we now hold space for these two things to coexist? Being an entrepreneur while also learning to live seasonally and aligning ourselves with the natural flow of things, when everything in our society teaches us and conditions us to resist that. So I would love your insight on that.
Such a great, great question. I love what you said about your guest, Antonio, bringing this concept of, or putting it in this context of liberated self versus oppressed self. Because I work with women who are in big leadership positions. They have real estate teams, commercial, companies, and they're in that kind of grind, and that like hustle culture and all that. And yet I find that so many times it's not even about the environment that we're in. It's more so about ourselves, because I can be, prancing around the fields with flowers and still feel very oppressed, so I want to highlight that, because I feel that oftentimes when we get on the healing journey, we think that we have to abandon the environment that we're in. And that can be true as well. But it's not a necessary thing that to say, I'm leaving this company because now I'm on my healing journey, because I do believe that many of us, we're all so unique. We are all, we're all human, and yet we all have different fingerprints, and I love looking at just nature and how we're created as clues to how do we thrive. And when I realize that, like that we all have different fingerprints. For me, what makes sense is we all have a different soul print that we're here to express. So we're all in these vessels, but we have our uniqueness. And sometimes that's going to be in the boardroom. Sometimes that's going to be in that company. And how amazing that we would actually get people who are more in their wholeness into these decision-making rooms. And so I feel that, ultimately, and for myself, this does not have to be true for anyone else, but for myself, that the purpose of my healing, the purpose of my remembering of these cycles, of the importance of grief, is so that I can come back to my community and offer that as a not as a service of like, that's the grief, but that is the offering. That is that I am engaging the world, that the reason why I'm doing my work is so that I can have the capacity, the bandwidth to engage the disasters of the world. Because as even now, I mean, let's look around at our world. Like, there is death everywhere, and more than ever, I'm hearing conversations about grief and death and all these things that now it's kind of like the trending thing, right? But when you look around, the reason, what we see is a reactionary way of life, like either do this and shaming and guilting people into what they should be doing. But so many times that's coming from the inner inability to be with the discomfort of loss, the discomfort of pain, the discomfort of change. And so I say, you said, where do we start? Such a powerful question. We start in our bodies. We start with creating new narratives that allow us to have space to be with our own suffering, and therefore opens to be with the community suffering, with the collective suffering that is here. Because until we are able to create that spaciousness, all the resolutions that we can come up with are reactions. They are not sustainable, right? And I feel this is where the power of and I'm gonna speak to women directly right now, because this is both, where my work is the juice of it, is that as a woman, we must become really embodied so that we can have mastery over our emotional bodies. Because when our emotional bodies are distraught, we have no capacity for the problems of others. We have no capacity for even our own lives. And we make choices that allow us to feel a false sense of security, a false sense of validation, and a false sense of strength. And what that leads us to is being unavailable for others, truly, because we either have to sacrifice ourselves, which is, for me and my lineage, that's what it was. It was, everyone else comes first. Everybody else's problems come first. And I am depleted. I am unhappy. I am bitter, because I never had time for any of my stuff. And I think that that's such a revolutionary thing now for women, is to say, I want to be okay. But it doesn't just end there. It doesn't just end as I want to be okay. It's because if I am not okay, nobody else is okay. Wow. And that's why I feel, let's start with us. It may seem like the fires are burning outside, and yes, they are. And if you're called to that, hey, amazing, do wherever you feel you're called to. But what I find is that in the long run, your inner work, the inner divisions, the inner wars have to be brought into a stability in order for us to truly be available for the conversations needed to bring a greater sense of harmony in the world.
Wow.
So let's start with us.
Start with us. And I love how you said, let's start in our bodies. Like, wow. Wow, 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 wow. I'm going to be journaling about this probably for the next 2 weeks. I'm an avid journaler, by the way. So so much to reflect on with our conversation. And I truly, from the bottom of my heart, cannot thank you enough for everything that you've shared, all of your insights, your story, your time. I mean, you, my friend, are a powerhouse and force to be reckoned with. I mean, the fact that you made time for this, it truly means the world to me. And you are a living embodiment of what it means to uplift women and to pour into your community. And you are living by that example. You lead with love, you lead with intention. And I love this call to action that you're sharing with everyone out there to really, draw internally and what that looks like to do that womb healing and what it looks like to live life in an embodied state, so that whether you are in the boardrooms or whether you're a manager in corporate or a real estate agent or you're a podcaster or you're a content creator just starting your journey or you're a graphic designer, whatever it is, to do that work and to not be afraid of it and to befriend it. It's not your enemy. Your trauma, your grief, your pain, it's not your enemy. Try to find a way to coexist and to heal and make it your friend, because that's the only way we're really going to start this process and to start in our bodies, like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Right? So
thank you, Mimi. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, well, wrapping up here, I really love for everyone tuning in to find ways to work directly with you or to amplify your work. So what are some amazing things you have going on? Because I already know y'all. And first of all, if y'all not following Anabel on Instagram yet, y'all need to do that right now.
Thank you.
But yes, please share everything. Where can people get connected with you? What's some work that, all of us can help amplify?
Thank you so much, Mimi. So Instagram's a great place to connect with me and to just kind of stay in the groove of what's happening. Also have my website, so you can sign up for a newsletter and actually have a free downloadable on there to connect to cycles. If you want to begin that journey, that's a great way to start, of just like getting familiar with what is even the cycle. So that's on my website, anabelvizcarra.com. I also host community grief events, which if you're ever close by, Mimi, please come, and share your medicine and your wisdom. But those are about every 2 months right now. They're in person, and I'm in Southern California currently. And to connect with me, send me a message if there's anything that stood out for you, or was very potent for you, or even triggering for you in this episode. I love feedback. I love to hear what is touching people, what is, because that's how we're also able to evolve and have more of these conversations that are in service to what's alive. I look forward to connecting with all of you, with many of you, whenever that aligns. And thank you so much for your time, for having me on here on this platform, for this beautiful conversation that's left me. My heart is open, and just like in such a yummy space of tenderness. And thank you for making room for this story, this Anabel. I call myself Anabel because like I'm a collection of stories and cells and all that. But thank you for making space, and listening, and your beautiful reflections and courageous share. So it's medicine for all of us. Thank you.
It's medicine. And I thank you so much for sharing that. And a common theme that I see you post on Instagram and on socials, just to end this episode on such a powerful note, if it wasn't already powerful, is your gifts that we have, or our gifts that we have, is truly our medicine to the world. So let's not be the world's best kept secret. Let's share our gifts with the world, because they are medicine for our communities, for ourselves, for lineage. And I really just wanted to uplift that message that you often share, because that literally, there's no better way to say that.
Yes. Do whatever it takes to mine that gold that is at the core of all of us, because we need it. We literally, the world is begging us to find that gold and share it, express it.
Find that gold and share it, y'all.
Live.
All right. Well, with that, thank you everyone for tuning in to this special episode. Thank you so much, Anabel, for your time. And for those listening, please, if you haven't already, leave us a rating on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you tune into your podcast. Please subscribe on YouTube. And it's Grief Sense, all lowercase letters. And yeah, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode. All right, bye for now. Grief Sense Familia. That wraps up another episode of the Grief Sense podcast. If this resonated with you, please feel free to share with someone who will appreciate it and tell a friend to tell a friend. Also, I'm a firm believer that feedback is a gift. So, I'm just saying, I won't be mad if you decide to leave a review and a rating of your experience on the podcast so far. Also, let's help each other find community in grief, and let's amplify these stories far and wide. Thank you for tuning in solidarity y con mucho amor, Mimi.